I'll be talking about careers in science communication, outreach, education, things like that, but also about startup biotech, which is the other piece that I've been involved in. So if you have questions about that, we'll definitely see that there. Let's just say if you have a question at any point while I'm going along, I'll definitely take plenty of questions at the end. But if you have questions while I'm going along, please just, all I can see at the side of my screen now is the little view of the top 5 faces, which is just Christine, the other 2 people who've turned on their cameras. Hi, Hannah and Matthew. And then nobody else has turned on their cameras. So just put your Zoom hand up or something if you have a question, and I'm happy to stop midway, because if this is just me talking straight and then taking questions, we're all going to hate the experience. So please, let's make it interactive in that way. I've been told that some people do some sort of breakout activities or something. I couldn't think of anything good to do for that. So we're just going to do it this way. So I'm going to be talking about these essentially unrelated careers. I've kind of had very different, non-overlapping, simultaneous careers in different aspects of science. I would have been very glad when I was in the department to have any kind of presentation about any career outside of academia, because a lot of science departments don't do what CMDB is doing today for you guys and what they do during this course. So I'm very glad that they've started doing that, because a lot of grad students reach the end of their PhD and believe that there's really only one path, and that's to go into academia. There's nothing wrong with academia. It is the right path for many people, but a lot of people don't choose other paths because they don't know that they exist. So hopefully you'll learn about certain paths today. My website is adamruben.net. In case anyone wants to learn more, it's not adamruben.com, because the other Adam Ruben got that one before I could get to it. But I've met him and he's a nice guy. And I keep getting emails meant for him because I got adamruben@gmail before he could get that. And so I keep getting got something about his son misbehaving at school. Anyway, all right, so let's begin. So I went to college at Princeton University. There's a picture of me. You can tell how popular I was, being in a marching band, playing the mellophone. Mellophone is basically like a trumpet with a thyroid condition. I even have the little ring in my finger that goes woo when you blow into it. So very, very cool guy. The goatee, you just have to trust that that was what was happening back then. So while I was there, a lot of you probably faced this maybe five to 10 years ago when you're going to college, deciding what to major in for the first time. And for me anyway, I didn't know too much about the difference between science and engineering. And you know just from seeing different schools that whatever the difference is between science and engineering, it's something important, because it's so important that every school has like the School of Engineering and the School of everything else, right? That's Hopkins, Whiting School of Engineering, and then Krieger School of Arts and Sciences, which is everything that's not engineering. So it seems like a really important decision. Are you going to be a scientist or an engineer? And I took science courses in high school and before that, but never engineering. I thought engineer is the guy with a striped hat who drives the train. So I started asking people, all right, I have to pick something to major in now. I'm 18, I'm an idiot, I don't know what I'm gonna do. What's engineering? And the best answer I got was, well, engineers solve problems. Is that different from science? Whereas scientists do what? Cause problems? Exacerbate problems? Study problems and publish about them and then never look back? That's not too them. So engineering school the summer before I bioengineering, but I'm not really seeing anything like that because Princeton didn't have that at the time. And he said, all right, well, what you should do then is you should major in chemical engineering and minor in bioengineering. Now, a minor in bioengineering just meant you're an engineer, but you take 5 biology classes.
Looks like we're having a little bit of a technical.
Cut out there completely.
Yeah, Adam, you just
okay.
a little bit, and then you're
can you hear me?
Now you're back. Yes, we can hear you.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay.
No explanation for that. I see a virtual thumbs up from Lucas. Thank you. Nope, not just you. Not just you. It's my laptop is like 6 years old, which for a laptop is like 100 years old. So I blame that. Sorry. Thank you. I apologize in advance if it happens again. I hope it doesn't. Let us resume. Okay. So what I was saying was that the dean basically said to major in chemical engineering, which was terrible advice because I didn't know what chemical engineers did, and now I was training to become one. And freshman year, you still don't learn what chemical engineering is because you take the more basic classes, chemistry and physics and math. And then sophomore year, I took intro to chemical engineering, and I learned, oh, that's what chemical engineers do. They design factories that produce chemicals. They balance the chemical and stoichiometric equations between this reaction vessel and this reaction vessel for a plant that makes fertilizer. And like, wow, I don't like that, and I'm bad at it. I got a 20% on my midterm in Intro to Chemical Engineering, and I got a nice little note when Dr. Sundaresan handed it back to me saying, I'm not saying you shouldn't be a chemical engineer, but you probably shouldn't be a chemical engineer. And I'm reading this note like, I know, it's hard and I hate it. So at that point, I really only had one chance to switch to another major. And I knew I wanted to do biology. So I left the engineering school, but we had two different types of biology. There was molecular biology, which I knew nothing about at the time, and EEB, which is ecology and evolutionary biology. So that's the animal stuff. And how do you choose the career for the rest of your life? Again, when you're 19, you don't know what you're doing. So I felt guilty dropping out of engineering, and people told me that molecular biology was harder. So I chose molecular biology. That was it. That's how I made that decision. I took intro to molecular bio. Luckily, it was interesting. I liked it, and that's what I stuck with. So I graduated with my bachelor's in molecular biology. I also had 3 minors. My minors were bioengineering, which I did from the biology side, not the engineering side. So basically, if you're a mole bio, but you take 5 engineering courses, then they give you a minor in bioengineering. I minored in creative writing and I minored in theater. So I've always had these interests that are not completely scientific on the other side of things. We'll talk more about those and how those kind of blended with science later. So after Princeton, I went right away to grad school at Johns Hopkins in the Freire lab. Christine said Freire, which is probably the correct pronunciation. I always said Freire. He's still there, isn't he? Is anyone in Ernesto's lab by any chance? If you are, put your virtual hand up. No? When I was there, his lab had 20 people in it. This is just a picture from a day when most of us went out to coffee, although Ernesto's not in the picture because he never went out to coffee with us. But Arnie and Victoria are probably still there, and they're in the picture. And I think the lab is much smaller now. But anyway, when I was there, I worked on the, as Christine said at the beginning, characterizing the binding of these novel compounds to aspartic proteases. So the parasite that causes malaria, it's a eukaryotic parasite, and at one life cycle stage, it has a food vacuole where it eats and breaks down your hemoglobin. How does it do that? Well, it uses these aspartic proteases, these proteins that break down the hemoglobin. And we had collaborators in Japan who were very good chemists, and they made all kinds of compounds that might block these proteins. So we would purify the proteins, mix in the compounds, and then see which compounds bound the most tightly using kinetics. And then we would also see why they bound tightly using thermodynamics. So we used isothermal titration calorimeters to look at entropy versus enthalpy and which one contributed to binding the most, which was important because you want enthalpic binding, which is specific bonds that you've made because you're clever, versus entropic binding, which is just things binding because hydrophobic things like each other. So it was interesting. I think I pictured science very differently going into it. And what academic science is. I imagined science as making discoveries to help people. This research project felt like that at first. It felt like I'm trying to discover new malaria drugs. But after a while, it was clear that no, in basic science, you're not really trying to discover new drugs. You're trying to show that promise exists. for a certain category of drugs, and then you publish a paper saying, here's why we think promise exists, and then you go study the next thing, which is very important. It's useful. It's vital to the progress of science, but it's not really how I wanted to spend my time. I realized during grad school that I was not destined to be an academic scientist. I was not interested in the publication. I was interested in the application. I wanted to study something that could be used in people. Toward the end of my grad school, I actually was able to put some of my drugs into mice, and they worked okay, but not great. I think the best drug helped the mice live with malaria for 9 days instead of 5 days, which sounds pretty good, except for the fact that there are already plenty of drugs that cure malaria. So, but that's not seen as a failure in early drug development. That's seen as, now you've discovered something, you publish that, and maybe that'll help somebody down the line. But I didn't want to work in that side anymore. I wanted to work on actually taking something from, lab into humans and developing and making something. That was my particular interest. Not everybody's interest. Plenty of people are destined to become academic scientists, and good for them. But I think part of grad school is finding out which type of scientist you are, whether you're an applied scientist or an exploratory scientist. Again, both important, but not both for everyone. So I defended my thesis in February of 2008, and then I stuck around the lab until May of 2008, finishing projects and things like that. And then I went right away to work at a small biotech company called Scenaria. So the way that I'm structuring this talk is, first I'll talk about my more traditional science career path, and then I'll talk about the outside stuff, what someone called my Batman career. So that'll be next. So Scenaria is located in Rockville, Maryland. I had 3 days between the end of Hopkins and the beginning of Scenaria. So Memorial Day weekend, I left a grad student and I entered as a scientist. You may be wondering, didn't you skip the part where you tell us about your postdoc? So this is a weird situation. Scenaria is a small company. They were and are a small company. At the time I joined, they had about 40 people. So when they hired me, I said, okay, well, will I be a postdoc? And they said, well, we're too small to have postdocs. You would be the only one. And we're not going to create a whole category just for one person. So we'll call you a scientist, but we'll pay you like a postdoc. Like, oh, well, that's still better. So that's how I got to skip the postdoc. It's not through any, accomplishment of my own. It's just because I joined a company that was that small. So they weren't kidding about paying me like a postdoc. It was very low, especially for industry. But this is a point I want to make very strongly, and please feel free to ask questions about this now or later. You will probably have other speakers from industry talking to you about what science is like in industry. Industry is not monolithic. There is big industry and there is small industry, and they are very different to work for. Pfizer, with tens of thousands of employees, versus a place like Scenaria that had 40 employees. And when I left in 2019, we were up to 70. That's not a big place. There are advantages and disadvantages of a small biotech company like this. An advantage is that everyone gets to do a little bit of everything. I was nominally in the lab, right? That was my job, doing research and development in the lab on this vaccine that I'll talk about in a minute. But at the same time, we just needed people to do other things too. So I was also in charge of analyzing clinical trial data and maintaining our inventory of vaccine. And I was in charge of shipping, and I was on the sales team, and I had to run the annual Christmas gift exchange and water all the plants. And I was in charge of the outreach that we did when kids would come to visit a couple of times a year. And it goes on. And that's just because at a small company, any given day, someone will point to you and say, we have a grant that we need to apply for a month from now. You are in charge of this. And then suddenly your job is that grant. And so the great part is you get experience in regulatory and manufacturing and quality control I'm now certified for hazardous goods shipping. So I know all about UN 3373 biological substance category B. and what you must do to ship it. Boring stuff, but someone's got to do it. And so if you're going to work at a small biotech, you have to see that as an advantage. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy. We had people who were told, soon after they started working, okay, we need someone to help label vials. Can you do that? And they would say, that's not my job. And they did not last long. So you have to be the sort of person who says, look, labeling vials is menial shit, but somebody has to do it. And, I'll do it. So that's an advantage is, you get to see all these different pieces. The disadvantage is you get pulled into areas of no expertise. You kind of have to reinvent the wheel sometimes. Someone will one day say, hey, there's this thing we're supposed to be doing. We're not doing it. Someone go Google it and let's start doing it. Whereas at Pfizer, they've got a whole team who does that thing. Just to use the grant as an example, I was once put in charge of a grant like that and told, okay, we're applying for this grant. You are, for the next month, that's going to be your life. And you have to coordinate all these people who are writing this grant and get it all into one whatever and to submit it. And we were working with collaborators on this grant, and all of our collaborators were big institutions that had big departments whose only job is to apply for grants. So when they gave us their pieces of the grant, they were polished, they were formatted well, and we just had me with Microsoft Word. And so seeing that sometimes, I was thinking, that's the advantage of big industry. They've got a system, and the system is something that works pretty well. So very, very different, and happy to take questions about it too. So what do we do at Scenaria? We were working on a whole organism malaria vaccine. As I said, malaria is caused by a parasite. It's a eukaryotic parasite. How are most vaccines made? Well, it's usually you take the thing that causes the disease and you weaken it, or you kill it, or you chop it into bits and you inject that. That works for bacteria and viruses pretty well, but for a eukaryotic parasite with 5,400 genes, it's a little bit harder. So Scenaria was founded in 2003 on the premise that, well, what if we could do that with the parasite that causes malaria? You can't just grow it in a vat the same way you can grow bacteria in a vat, but we can raise it in mosquitoes. We could use mosquitoes like little bioreactors, grow the parasite, weaken it, and then inject it. That's basically what the vaccine was. Now, there are a lot of steps in the middle that were really, really tough to get past. The mosquito has to be clean, right? The mosquito itself can't have viruses or bacteria. So Scenaria developed the world's only aseptic mosquito colony. It took them a couple of years, but they have mosquitoes that are clean enough that you can inject what comes out of them. You have to have a way to grow up a lot of parasites in each mosquito to make it efficient. So they have these super infected mosquitoes. You have to have a way to get the parasites out of the mosquitoes. That, unfortunately, is hand dissection. So everybody there is trained at manually dissecting the salivary glands out of mosquitoes. By the time I left, I could dissect 360 mosquitoes an hour. We had people who could do 500. It's just from optimization, training, innovations, and we got to the point where I just heard the other day they dissected 50,000 mosquitoes in one manufacturing run. Not fun, but it works, and it's enough to get the vaccine out. And then my step of things was cryopreservation. Once you get the parasites out, you have to freeze them so that they're still good later, because they're not going to live at room temperature very long. So I worked on ways to cryopreserve the parasites, keep them alive, keep them happy, and then make them thawable at the bedside. So you can see me in that picture there. I'm standing up. You can't tell that it's me because I'm entirely clad in Tyvek. This is basically what I look like now when I go to the supermarket. When people say, I can't wear a mask for 20 minutes, I just think of the days in the manufacturing facility there. Like, I would put that mask on and I wouldn't take it off for 8 hours. And I'm double gloved and wearing Tyvek with not a square centimeter of skin exposed. Putting a mask on for 20 minutes when I go to the grocery store, it's like a break. So anyway, there I am, and there's 3 other people sitting at the hood where they're vialing the vaccine. And when I started in 2008, the vaccine was basically still in the research and development phase. They knew what they wanted it to be, but we couldn't put it in people yet. In February 2009, we sent in an investigational new drug application to the FDA to get permission to perform our first clinical trial, which we did in 2009. And then It kept going from there. Actually, I'll show you. So our first clinical trial was published in Science in 2011, where we basically demonstrated the vaccine was safe and well tolerated, but it didn't do anything. It didn't protect anybody for the most part. So that's kind of disappointing. I mean, especially when you're in a small biotech company where the company can dissolve based on scientific results, right? There's no company. We didn't have investors. All we had was grants, mostly grants. So, but we still were able to publish this in Science. You can see me there. I'm like 17th author or something, because it was a two-part paper. Part one, vaccine is safe but doesn't work. Part two, we think we know how to make it work. And it had to do with where we injected it. Apparently putting the vaccine just under the skin, intradermally or subcutaneously, didn't do it. But we had every reason to think from monkey studies done by our collaborators at NIH that if you inject the same vaccine directly into the vein, that makes all the difference. And so we did that in a clinical trial afterwards. And that's the paper on the right, where we actually showed that at the highest dose and the highest number of doses, the vaccine was 100% effective in preventing malaria. That was great. That was a lot of fun. We got to see our names on CNN. We got to celebrate all this great press. The company was not going under. And the vaccine, the thing that we'd spent years on, something that we had, with our own hands, put into bottles, protected people against malaria. That may sound like it should be the end of the story, except that was a regimen of, I think, 5 or 6 doses of the vaccine. And as you know from the COVID vaccine, it's hard to get people to do 2 doses, let alone 6. So, but that's okay. We can just give more in each dose. Is there a way we can get it down to 3 doses? And this is protecting people in Maryland against a deliberate challenge with malaria. What will happen when we give the vaccine to people in Africa who actually live among malaria? So I'm not going to say too much about this. Just be happy to answer questions about it later. But basically, over the next few years, we did more and more clinical trials. The vaccine has now been in, I think, over 3,000 people. And all the trials are sort of structured differently. The biggest trial that we'd done while I was there was a trial of over 300 infants in Western Kenya. Infants living in an area in Kenya where the average person gets malaria 6 times a year. So it's basically a place where everyone has malaria all the time. And so we were actually able to give infants our vaccine in a 3-dose regimen and see what happens there. I don't believe that one's published yet, so I can't talk about it more. I'm not sure how much of these I can talk about anyway, since I don't work there now. But what you see on the screen has been published. So we've got a number of other publications of other clinical trials. In 2015, I was promoted from scientist to associate director, which didn't really mean much, but it was better to put on a business card. And then 2019, I decided to leave Scenaria for various reasons that I can discuss if people really want to know. But I left, and at that time, we were basically getting ready to do phase 3 clinical trials. So that's where I believe they are now. And sorry, I just noticed there were messages in the chat, but they were not relevant. And so then in 2019, I left and decided to start a new job working for the US federal government. Ooh. So I am a biologist working for the US federal government. I can't tell you any more about that, not because I do something mysterious, but just because it's a stupid logistical reason, but Hopkins is paying me a little bit to speak to you today, and I'm not allowed to accept outside pay for talking about what I do for the federal government. If you want to know what I actually do, I'm on LinkedIn. It's listed there. If you have questions about it independently, I'd be happy to answer them by email. Feel free to ping me on email or LinkedIn or something, but I just can't put it into this presentation other than to say it's not something ominous, and it has been very interesting and very different from small biotech. So moving on from biotech to the Batman career, science communication. So this is something that I've just sort of always been interested in on the side. And I've divided the different science communication things that I do into 4 different categories. So I'll just sort of talk about them one at a time, which for me is writing, public speaking, performance, television, and teaching. So we'll start with writing. I asked Christine before the presentation, are there going to be any professors on the Zoom today? And she said, no. I'm thinking, oh, good, because there's this. So one of the first things I did after grad school was publish a book called Surviving Your Stupid, Stupid Decision to Go to Grad School. There's an illustration that I like from the book. My college roommate actually did the illustrations. He's great. So this is someone giving graduate school the double bird on their way out. People often ask me, why did I hate graduate school at Hopkins? And I didn't. The thing is, I didn't hate it. But while I was there, I was on the GRO, Graduate Representative Organization, which I'm assuming you guys still have. Do you have it? Okay, good. The 2 people whose cameras are on are nodding. And I got to learn a lot about not just the pressures faced by me and my colleagues, but the pressures faced by other grad students in other departments. And I see people in the chat saying, yes, it's there. Good. So, we can complain about low stipends. We can complain about not knowing when you're going to graduate. I did sort of gloss over the fact that I spent 7 years at Hopkins. I didn't think it was going to be 7, but you don't know. In that last year or 2, you're just walking around going, what? Like the 6th year of graduate school is a month of pregnancy, right? You're just like, did I miss? Was something supposed to happen? What is going on? They told us on our way in that the average time to graduation was 5.25 years. But here's how it, and it's, yeah, people are nodding, same thing. That is the lie that is told to all graduate students everywhere. In fact, the way it worked with our class, we had 20 people in our class who joined. 1 dropped out after the first year. The other 19 of us were all still there in our 6th year. And it was amazing. I remember the professors wanted to have a chat with us. They called all the 6th years into the conference room. And it was amazing because basically all the grad students angrily said to the professors, why haven't we graduated? And all the professors said to us, why haven't you graduated? We all kind of went, huh? Because everyone thought it was somebody else's responsibility to move us along. We were waiting for our advisors to have that magical moment of now. But they were waiting for us to come to them with our plans. Okay, here's what I've done. Here's why it makes a coherent scientific story. Here's what I think I need to finish. I finish my dissertation. Some people are very good at proactively doing that. I don't think I realized I was supposed to do that. I think a lot of people didn't. So that's why it took 7 years. Anyway, those are some of the negative aspects of grad school, things we had to fight for in the GRO. The year that the university decided they should charge us for parking on campus, and the amount they charged us was like 1/12 of our stipend, even for parking after hours. And so the GRO had to fight that. I don't know if they've lost that battle since. And then we'd talk to grad students in the humanities who are on the GRO, and anytime we complained, we quickly shut up because we realized they had it worse. I think the average time to PhD in the philosophy department was something like 11 years. And a lot of that was because their stipend was something like $12,000. And so they had to take a 40-hour-a-week job in order to stay alive. So anyway, all these different problems with grad school, fighting against unions, for example. I don't remember unionization being a big thing at Hopkins when I was there. It was just sort of a lot of schools that don't want grad students to unionize. So that's what I wrote this book about. And the way this book originated is that during grad school, I was writing short humor pieces for the National Lampoon website. It was a website, National Lampoon, they made a lot of great movies in the 80s, a lot of terrible movies since then. But they had a humor website, and I had a friend from college who worked there, and so he got me connected. And so I would write these things, and just like some little, Dave Barry-ish, but not as good as Dave Barry, humor piece. And then I'd send it to them, and they would say, no, make it raunchier. That's for our audience. And I would just throw in some genital references, and they'd be like, good, better. It was terrible. The stuff I wrote for them is no longer online, and I'm glad. But at one point, they contacted all the writers and said, does anyone want to pitch us a book idea? And I thought, well, write what you know. There are all these satirical, the college humor guide to college, but there's no guide to grad school. So what if I write one? And Lampoon did not want it. They basically said, our demographic is drunk frat guys, and they don't go to grad school. So they didn't take the idea, but then their whole book division went under. And the person who helped me with putting together a proposal for this book was fired. And then she contacted everybody who she'd been working with and said, well, I've been fired, but if you guys all still want to pitch your proposals out into the real world, I will sell you a list of agents' email addresses. And that's basically what happened. I sat on that decision for 2 years because I didn't know if I wanted to do it. I didn't know if it was a scam, all that stuff. And then I ended up doing it, and I was happy the way it worked out. There was one agent who was interested. She found one publisher who was interested. Almost everybody else said the same thing. They said, but you're marketing a book for a demographic that is poor. They can't afford to buy books. Doesn't make sense. Luckily, Random House didn't think so. So, book came out in 2010. And then that book opened a lot of doors. So I started getting invited places to speak about the book, which I'll talk about in a minute. I put out a video, the grad student rap. That's actually one of my friends from Hopkins, from the PhD program, Mike Freeman. He's now an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. We filmed that. Actually, that's the blackboard behind us. It's in Remsen. So we filmed this video. You can see it on YouTube. It's got like 100-something thousand views. It's not like a YouTube sensation, but for me, that was just an amazing number of views. And it's just to promote the book. And my friend Chuck Na, who was also in the biology department here, filmed the video and did the editing. And then one day I got an email from someone at Science, the actual magazine Science, specifically their subjournal Science Careers, saying, would you be interested in maybe writing a humor column in the journal Science? And to me, this was like, Roshini has put the Roshini has put the YouTube link in the chat. Don't watch it right now. This was amazing that a science magazine would want a humor column, because all throughout my life I've written some sort of humor column. I wrote it in high school. In my high school newspaper, I had a column called Adam's Alley, and then in college, I had something, the Butler Banter and the Nassau Week. I had a couple of publications where I wrote for, and then in grad school, when I was on the GRO, what I did was I edited the grad news, the newsletter that went out to all grad students, and so I started writing things for that. And now the idea that I could do this for a national audience was just amazing to me, and so I wrote an article in I think the spring of 2010, and they liked it. And so I wrote another one the next month. And now I've been publishing them almost every single month since then. So I'm up to 130 plus of these that have been published so far. In fact, I've got one due tomorrow that I'm trying to work on. And so that has been amazing to me, that anyone with this publication would want a humor column. And all I write about are science careers. Humor about science careers, which means I'm constantly desperate for topics for articles, because I've written 130 and I'm running out. I've been running out for years. So anytime if something interesting comes up, or I have an idea like, isn't that kind of weird? It's kind of weird that we criticize grade grubbers, but we tell them the grades are important. That's a column. Okay, we make a big deal about whether people are geniuses when they're 10. Science loves this trope of the young prodigy, and yet when they're 30, can you tell the difference? That's a column. Any single one of these things about science careers. So the one I just published a couple of days ago was about science communication and ways you can do science communication careers without having to quit your main science job. That is something we'll definitely talk about more today. Because all these science careers in communication that I'm showing you, these are all things that can be done on the side. Because I had a postdoc at a talk I gave once at NIH say that she wants to leave the lab and go to science communication, but how do you get started? And I told her, don't leave the lab. Get started today doing these things, but don't quit your day job. There's so many science communication things you can do. And you might decide you love them and want to leave the lab and do them permanently. You might decide you hate them, and then good thing you didn't cut ties. So that's the column Experimental Error. And then as a result of the column and the book, Oh, sorry, no, separate thing. As long as I have a literary agent, I've been pitching her other book ideas. She's hated all of them, which has been very disappointing because a pitch is like 30 pages of here's a sample chapter, here's the research I've done. Only one book has she moved forward with. And so that was my second book. Pinball Wizards came out in 2017, a much smaller publisher, Chicago Review Press. But it's basically it's a book, a narrative nonfiction book about the past, present, and future of pinball. Nothing to do with science, nothing to do with grad school. It's just a separate thing that I'm obsessed with. If anyone has questions about pinball or wants to discuss pinball, I'd be happy to do that at length, no matter how irrelevant it is to what we're doing today. I've been missing desperately going to venues to play pinball during the pandemic. And part of that is pandemic, and part of that is I have 3 kids now. And so it's hard to do anything outside the house. So as a result of these things, I started getting a message. My internet connection is unstable. Can you guys still see and hear okay? Okay, great. I started getting invited to speak at different places, sometimes talking about grad school, sometimes talking about years, sometimes something completely different. And so I just sort of maintained a list of all the places that I've gotten to go to and speak at or perform, which has been a lot of fun. NASA is there in red and italics at the bottom right because I'm speaking there on Thursday and haven't been there yet. Unfortunately, a lot of the really cool places in the right-hand column are places that I spoke at during the pandemic, so I never got to go there. So like, you want to speak in London? You want to speak in Hyderabad? Like, sure. Oh, wait, London and Hyderabad are both my basement. But until the pandemic, it was amazing. I get all these cool trips to different places, 33 states and 6 countries I've gotten to travel to, just talking to grad students in different places. In fact, I just noticed right now the tea that I'm drinking is in a mug from the Graduate Student Council of the University of Louisville, where I spoke a few years ago. So I have a lot of swag in my house that is not from colleges I attended. So now we're in the sort of live performance, live speaking part of things. That has included lots of other things, such as fun with liquid nitrogen, which is great. You demonstrate for kids. In my old lab in Scenario, which you can see there, I was dipping things in liquid nitrogen for 5th graders who would visit every now and then. Actually, this is kind of interesting. You can see that the different bays of the lab are labeled by letter, and my bay was right next to E and F. And so my thesis advisor's initials were towering over me the whole time I worked at Scenario, Ernesto Friere. Like, he's still watching me. I hope I'm living up to his ideals. So anyway, fun with liquid nitrogen in front of kids, and that show where I made fun of people who do liquid nitrogen demonstrations in front of kids, called Dr. Science's Science Time Science Vaganza. On the side, that's my friend Chuck, who did the show with me. Chuck was also, as I said before, a student in the biology department here. He was in Alan Shern's lab. And so we did this show on stage in a number of places, and that was kind of fun. And then I've started doing a lot of other sort of performance things that don't relate to science. So I've been doing stand-up comedy for about 20 years now. Stand-up comedy, character acting, weird little performance things. I was in a Korean soap opera, and I held doors at a Kenny Loggins concert in a tux. Basically, in grad school, I answered a lot of ads on Craigslist. I've been a fake rabbi at weddings and bar mitzvahs. I've now done that at more than 100 different weddings and bar mitzvahs. And you go in and make fun of people's relatives. It's a very strange gig. And I've told stories on stage with groups like The Moth. I was on The Moth Radio Hour on NPR with one of my stories. They sort of replay it every Christmas because Christmas themed. Story District is a DC-based storytelling group. And these are sort of like, these are true stories that you tell in front of a live audience, or that you told in front of a live audience before the pandemic. And Story District, for them, I started telling stories with them, and then started teaching storytelling with them, and then stopped doing that when I had extra. And Mortified is a group I've been very involved with. They are a group that has people read their embarrassing childhood diaries on stage in front of a live audience. It is a very fun concept. There are mortified groups all around the world, I think 20 different cities, and I'm one of the lead producers for the DC and Baltimore chapters. So before the pandemic, we had about 15 shows a year, was performing in and producing. Now it's many fewer, but we're going to be at the Kennedy Center in February. So that's, and then other groups. I'm putting just a few logos on this slide as examples, but basically, anyone that has the ability to talk to people, to give a presentation, to tell true stories, Profs and Pints, Story Collider, Nerd Night is basically giving a real scientific talk in front of people who are drinking. Same thing as Profs and Pints. Thirst, same as that. So these are just a few examples. But I have found that if you're interested in publicly presenting science live on stage to people, at least when there's not a pandemic, there are a lot of venues where you can do that. If you just search for the word science cafe, they are constantly looking for scientists who are interested in presenting their scientific research in an accessible way to a lay audience. And so I've seen great talk, an organic chemist who talked about the science of brewing beer, or a meteorologist who talked about why weather prediction is difficult. And so if you think you can put your research into a cool 30 minutes that people would like to pay money to go and hear while they drink beer on a weeknight, you can contact any of these places and get yourself set up to do that. Again, pandemic pending. But when there's no pandemic, this is the sort of thing. So in general, before the pandemic, I had maybe 50 to 100 live performances of some kind a year. Now it's, the actual live, I can probably count on one hand, and even those don't involve travel. On Thursday, when I'm going to be at NASA, I'm going to literally be at NASA, and that's the first time I've been on a stage in months. But hey, we got Zoom. So now we're going to transition to talking about television. Although I want to pause again and say, please feel free to interrupt with any questions, or again, we can do it at the end also. But if you have questions, I'm happy to interrupt my flow of talking while you sit and listen, which I would hate that when I was, listening to scientific seminars or anything like that. It's just, if no one has any questions, maybe we'll, when I'm done with this before the questions, we'll take a 5-minute break or something just so people can stretch. I do see something in the chat. Please tell us about meeting Ted Allen. Oh, good. Well, I'm about to. That's Ted Allen. You may recognize him from Chopped, or he was on the original Queer Eye before that. So television is something I've always dreamed of doing, and I have no idea how to do it, how to get involved. Like, how do you even get there? And I can tell you how it happened for me, but I don't know if it's an example that's universally applicable. So toward the end of grad school, again, my friend Chuck, who's the guy who was in Dr. Science's Science Time Science Vaganza with me, he was on some kind of mailing list because he had done improv classes at Second City in Chicago. And he got an email, as did everybody, saying, we're looking for biologists to be on a TV show. He forwarded the email to me, and they wanted people to make a 60-second video of themselves busting a food myth and then send that in as the audition. So figured, why not? Chuck filmed it. I busted the myth of, can you eat 6 saltines in 60 seconds without drinking anything? Spoiler alert, you can't. And if you do it over and over again while someone films you, your mouth gets really cut up. But there's some science there. You're not making enough saliva, and you need saliva to swallow. Yes, you can go to YouTube and find people eating more than 6 saltines in a minute without water, but it's just a few people. I can tell you from experience, it's really, really hard. Not impossible, but you probably can't do it. I think I got up to 5 at the most. Sorry, my cushion is slipping here. So I sent that in, and they liked it. They called me back. I did another audition in New York, and that led to this show, Food Detectives. Food Detectives was basically like Mythbusters about food science. So Ted Allen was the host. Meeting Ted was great. He's a smart guy. He's a nice guy. Nothing negative to say about him other than the fact that he was working on 2 projects at once, and Chopped became his successful show, and I was on the other one. So Food Detectives lasted for 2 seasons. It was basically, and you can find clips from it on YouTube. We did, I think, 10 episodes the first season and 13 the second season, and I was in about half of them. And so I would be there in a lab coat explaining the science to Ted. We had a really cool set with this beautiful looking kitchen laboratory. But the science in it was shit. It was all made up and not real. So as an example, they wanted me to do the 5-second rule. That was premiere, you know, the what's it called, just lost the word, when the first episode of a series, not premiere. Yeah, it is series premiere. Anyway, first episode, pilot, that's the word. The pilot episode was going to be all about the 5-second rule. Is it real? And as you know, if you're a biologist, no, it's not real. Right? You drop the bacteria, don't wait 5 seconds before hopping on. They're gonna get on the food. But they wanted me to actually, they didn't know really how to test it. They wanted me to do some tests and show it. And so I actually borrowed equipment from Ernesto's lab and brought it with me up to New York. And if you watch the show, you'll see that I'm wearing purple nitrile gloves that I took from Ernesto's lab. And you'll see in some other episodes things like spectrophotometers that Bob Horner lent to me. Dr. Horner's still there? Okay, good. He's amazing. But he would lend me equipment from his lab that I would just sort of carry up to New York and put in the background. And I remember asking the director before the first show, like, I can test the 5-second rule in that I can put things on the ground and then try to, you know, put them in a tube of saline and see if bacteria grows on a plate from the saline. But it's not really that rigorous. And Mythbusters, the real show, just did the 5-second rule, and they did it pretty rigorously. So why do we want to do a show demonstrating something they've already done better? And her answer was, welcome to television, son. So I thought, oh, all right. It was science, but it was Food Network science, where the best trained scientist on set was me. And I was not, you know, I was just a grad student, so I didn't know what I was doing. I had to tell them, you know, buy this incubator, buy these plates. And they would do things like, okay, what's the best thing to take the smell out of a stinky refrigerator? And so they got 3 refrigerators and they left them unplugged with Chinese food in them for a week. And then they put nothing in one and baking soda in another and activated charcoal in a third. So how are they going to test which one smells the best? Which one is this guy willing to keep his head in the longest? And that's not science. And I had a couple of conversations with the director saying, like, this isn't really science. And she said, no, we're not doing science. We're doing demonstrations. We're taking things that other people know and we're showing it, we're illustrating it in a television-friendly way to convey already existing conclusions. Okay, fair enough, but not science. But at the same time, lots of fun to do it. I got to drop, you know, Mentos in Diet Coke. Sometimes we got to go around New York and film, you know, live in places where we were trying to swab water fountains to see what was dirty. So that show ended, and that eventually led to this brief appearance on a show called Head Rush in the Science Channel, and then other shows, random things, Mysteries at the Kremlin on the Travel Channel. That was a show where I spoke about a Soviet scientist in the 1920s who tried to crossbreed humans and chimps. Very, very weird story. The weirdest part about it is that obviously he didn't succeed, but he didn't succeed not for scientific reasons, but for purely logistical reasons. Like he would get the chimps on a boat to Germany from Africa, to Russia from Africa, and the boat would sink. Then you get more chimps, and the day before he's supposed to inseminate one of the human female volunteers, the chimp would have a hemorrhage and die. And so this guy worked on this for years, and then he was about ready to do it again, and there was a change of government in Russia, and he was sent to the Gulag, where he died. So he went to his grave thinking that you can crossbreed humans and chimps, and he just couldn't get there. Anyway, neat story. So I got to tell that story on the Science Channel, the Travel Channel. The best show I've been on is Outrageous Acts of Science. We did 102 episodes of that show from 2012 to 2019. That was a show of scientists talking about YouTube clips. So that was great. They would find funny YouTube clips that had science involved somehow, and we'd make fun of the clips, and we'd also explain the science. So that was a great show. these shows for the Science Channel, when they're in general, they're really good at getting the science right. One thing I didn't know about television before I started doing it was that networks don't make shows. Networks buy shows. The people making the show are the production company. So I didn't work with the Science Channel on the show. I worked with October Films, which is this production company based in London that makes the show. So the show is usually only as good as the production company making it. And October Films was great. They did their research. At one point, I remember working on an episode where there was the camera guy had a degree in physics, and the guy ordering our lunches had an MD from Oxford. So everybody there knew science, and they were going to get it right. So that was great to work on. At one point, I made my own web series for the Journal of Visualized Experiments, which is great because I got to put my kids in the episodes. I got to put my 90-year-old great aunt in an episode. Nobody watched this, but it was still fun to make. It's on Vimeo, and you can see there are literally dozens of views. And it was called Ask Adam About Grad School. And Mortified, the show of people presenting their diaries on stage, was actually a Netflix series for a while, a couple years ago, called The Mortified Guide, and a couple episodes of that. And the show I'm on now is called What on Earth? That's on the Science Channel, and it's we're actually about to start filming our 9th season on Friday. I'm going to be going to film the beginning of the 9th season of What on Earth. That's a show where people look at satellite imagery and say there's something weird in the desert. What are these strange lines? And then scientists explain what those strange lines in the desert are. So it's pretty cool. And then one of my favorite things that I've gotten to do, my landline is ringing. Sorry, you're going to hear ringing for just a moment. My wife insisted we keep a landline for emergencies, which is all it means is we get telemarketers. If I answer that right now, someone's going to say like, your Google business listing, or please don't hang up. So sorry, that's gonna wear itself out in a minute. Good, gone. So this show, Eleanor Wonders Why, has been one of my favorite things I've gotten to do. We've had one season, and I'm desperately hoping we'll be renewed for a second. It was nominated for an Emmy, so I'm really hoping. This is a show, imagine if it was an emergency. Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Well, that's just too darn bad. This is a show, I can't take credit for creating or any of the creative input behind the show. This is not my show. This show was created by Jorge Cham, who writes PhD comics, and Daniel Whiteson, who's his collaborator in California. And basically, it's a show for preschoolers about a curious little rabbit named Eleanor. And Eleanor learns about science and nature with her friends Ari the bat and Olive the elephant. It's a beautifully drawn show. It's really, in a world of 3D animated stupid PJ Masks, which my kids like to watch, it's a really calming and pleasant show with really good preschool level science in it. So my role on the show has been as a writer. I've written 5 episodes of the show out of the 80 that they've had already. So that it's been a tremendous amount of work for them to do. This is just a still from one of my episodes where they build a couch cushion castle, and they learn from ants how ants work together to build things. And it's been a tremendous learning experience. I thought it's got to be extra easy to write science for preschoolers. Not at all. I remember I got a note from PBS at one point saying, take this word out of your script. Preschoolers don't know what it means. And the word was twig. I thought, really? And my son was 4 at the time. So I said, Benjamin, you know what a twig is, right? And he said, is it a bug? I'm like, oh my God, they're right. Kids know the word stick. They don't know twig. So you learn so much about what you can and can't communicate to kids. I've had 5 episodes that have been aired, but I've pitched about 30. A lot of my ideas, they didn't want for one reason or another, but it could include things like, I had an idea once that I thought was the best, like the greatest idea that for the series, where it's going to be something about comparing the length of grass in this yard to this yard, but they're going to learn about sample size. That I can't say I've got one short blade of grass from this yard and one long blade of grass from this yard, and so this yard has shorter grass. No, sample size. And they basically said that's so far above, we're trying to for us, the level of science here is more like baths keep you clean. So that's where that is. Is there a reverse thesaurus for small children? That's a great question. You should write that. You should write a reverse thesaurus for small children. I like that idea. So that's Eleanor Wonders Why. It aired starting last year. It's still airing new episodes now. And then again, I'm hoping for a second season. And that's something that's kind of a through line with all the science communication stuff. Almost none of it is guaranteed from one gig to the next. I mean, my science column has been going strong for 11 years, but pretty much everything else, it's you know, you are never assured that it's going to keep going. Anything could be canceled any minute. I got an email once saying, we are hereby inviting you as our keynote speaker at the University of San Diego's whatever day. And I wrote back saying, great, I'm so happy I'll be there. I heard nothing. A week later, hey, haven't heard from you. What are the details? And a week later, I get an email saying, we went with someone else. Like, but your first email wasn't asking, you just said, we're inviting. Come on. But that's the way it is with everything. Nothing is until it is. Quick story about that. So Outrageous Acts of Science was us putting YouTube clips online and talking about the science behind them. At one point, the executive producer got an idea for a spin-off series called Outrageous Acts of Danger. Now, that was going to be a series where we basically take people who had clips on Outrageous Acts of Science, and we use the resources and money of the Science Channel to have them redo their clip on a grand scale. So we had a guy who vacuum sealed himself to a shop window. On Outrageous Acts of Danger, we would vacuum seal him to a helicopter. We had someone showing how you can make toilet paper rope very strong by twisting it and twisting it. We would build a toilet paper suspension bridge across a chasm and cross it. So cool stuff like that. It was going to be the biggest budget show in the Science Channel's history. I was going to be one of 3 hosts. We're going to film in England, and I was going to need to live in London for like 2 months. Now, that's a much bigger deal than any of these other shows. These other shows, I'm showing you a lot of them, but basically I'm filming something about 5 days a year. You know, this is not a full-time job. So 50 days of filming in London was huge for me. I was so excited. I actually had to arrange to take leave from my job, all this stuff. A week and a half before I'm supposed to get on a plane, I get a phone call saying that someone on the Science Channel producing a different show has been injured. If you've heard of Pumpkin Chunkin', it's a competition where people build cannons and trebuchets that shoot a pumpkin across a field. Well, apparently the Science Channel was filming it, and someone's cannon exploded. A piece of shrapnel hit a Science Channel producer in the head and almost killed her. And so the network said, we can't have any new shows with dangerous stunts. And my show was going to be called Outrageous Acts of Danger. So the show had been in progress. You know, I wasn't filming it yet, but the staff, the crew had been working on this show for months. They had contracts, they had built sets. They had, you know, they're making hotel arrangements and train tickets to go back and forth from London to this Air Force hangar where they had rented to film the show. There was literally a bag of piranhas in London that no one knew what to do with at this point. Everybody was fired. I don't know where the piranhas ended up. I was supposed to swim with them. So just like that, it never happened. And that show didn't exist. Other shows that are not pictured, just because I don't have pictures of them, I was on a show called Superhuman Science on the international version of Discovery, Weather Gone Viral on the Weather Channel, How Do They Do It on the Science Channel, Ancient Unexplained Files, which I think was on Science. I haven't even seen it, but it came out last year. My DVR missed it. That's the thing. A lot of times you're on a show, they don't necessarily, you know, it's not like there's some big premiere party. You have to find it on the DVR or you're never going to see it. And a new show called Inventions That Change History that filmed a couple months ago that'll be out in the spring on Discovery Plus. So I have a picture there just from the set where I filmed it. And that's how most of these go. You sit in a chair, like the chair in the front there. You have lots of water and notes nearby next to the chair. And then that's where you're sitting for hours. So on Friday, when I film more of What on Earth, I will be in a chair for about 12 hours. With frequent bathroom breaks. And that's just how these work. Food Detectives was different. It had a set. For a lot of these other science shows, they just want a scientist in a chair explaining things. Okay, last segment of my talk. I see it's 11:07. I'll go through this really quickly, then we'll take a 5-minute break, and then I'll be happy to answer questions. So while I was at Hopkins, I started teaching. That was something that came about thanks to a professor in CMDB, Victor Corsis, who I think then he left for Emory and then he retired. But he was great. Basically, Hopkins was looking for science students to teach writing. Victor Corsis knew I was interested in writing because I had to get his permission to sign a form, because while at Hopkins, I took a playwriting class for fun. That was one of the cool things that I thought too few people took advantage of. You have tuition at Hopkins being paid for. You can take any class you want for fun. And so I started looking through different, no, Matt, you're shaking your head. Oh no, that used to be the case. Oh, that's very disappointing. Well, it used to be that you could do it with permission from your department. And Victor Corsis gave me permission to take a playwriting class. Again, this is not for a grade, not for any purpose other than I want to be there and it sounds like fun. But because he had signed my form to do that, he knew I was interested in writing. And so when the expository writing program came to science departments and said, we want a grad student to teach a writing class, he nominated me. And the next thing I knew, in 2002, as a second-year grad student, I was designing my own class to teach to undergrads that were only 2 years younger than me. Wow, weird. And so I taught a class that was basically science writing. And then over the years, that class evolved to be a class about the public perception of science. And in fact, by the time I graduated in 2007, 2008, I was technically a lecturer in the English department, so adjunct faculty, while I was simultaneously grad student in biology. And so by that time, I was teaching 2 classes a semester, this public perception of science class. Lots of fun. I enjoyed teaching a lot. I did not enjoy grading a lot. That took many, many, many hours, because students would write these 10-page essays, and you want to give each one, the proper amount of time to review it and write intelligent comments. And so it was a lot of work. Something I can't do now that I have kids. The one class I still teach is the second one listed here, a stand-up comedy class that I taught through the Hopkins Film and Media Studies Department over intersession for 15 years. And this year, we skipped it in 2021. And then in 2022, we're going to be resuming in person, fingers crossed, but through the theater department instead of film and media studies. And so part of the reason I've continued teaching that one is that, unlike the semester-long classes, I can finish that in 3 weeks, and I don't live in Baltimore. So I have to commute. I live in DC. So teaching a semester-long class commuting to Baltimore would be hard. But teaching a class I can teach at night for 3 weeks in January in Baltimore is doable. And then this spring of last year, for the first time, I taught a class at the Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, on comedy. They named the class Comedy and Its Discontents. I still don't quite know what that's meant to mean, but that was the title of the class. And then while at Hopkins, I taught a class to teachers at the Hopkins School of Education, teaching K-8 teachers how to teach science, and a summer course called Discover Hopkins for exceptional high school students on biology, bioethics, and I even taught a course with a pandemic theme. Never knew that would be useful. And that was basically the teaching that I've done there.